Welcome everybody to today's Responding to Child Deaths in North Yorkshire and York, a multi-agency approach. Just some housekeeping for you to be aware of. Please be aware of your environmental noise and please mute your microphone when you're not using it. The session will be recorded, so we'll be very happy if you want to switch your cameras off. And if you have any questions, obviously, you can use a hand, you can use the chat, whichever way around that you want to do. So in terms of today's session, what we're going to look at is an overview of what the CDOP is. We're going to look at the joint agency response and support to families. We'll talk about the child death reviews that are undertaken for all child deaths and the work of the child death overview panel. And then we'll go on to looking at the local picture and some of the regional work that we get involved with, and also talk about what's known as a National Child Mortality database. So when we talk about CDOP, what we're talking about, an acronym is the Child Death Overview Panel. And this is a multi-agency statutory requirement that is placed on all local areas to have a local child death review partners who review all child deaths in relation to children and young people. The responsibility for ensuring that child death reviews are carried out is held by the child death review partners, which is principally the local authority and the integrated care boards for every local area. And child death review partners are required to make arrangements to view all child deaths of children who are normally resident in their local area and make arrangements for the analysis of information from all child deaths. So we contribute towards a national picture, but also we look at our own learning from the local deaths. And when we're talking about a resident in a local area, we have where children have maybe died abroad. Say we've had children die in foreign exotic countries, and we've reviewed the child death in terms of the information that we could pull together relating to that as well. The statutory process has been in place for quite some time. In a matter of fact, it was 2018, and this is all outlined in Chapter 5 of Working Together to Safeguard Children 2018, and also the Child Death Review Operational and Statutory Guidance of 2018, which is published by NHS England in October of 2018. So our CDOP is a subgroup of the local safeguarding children partnerships for both the City of York and also for North Yorkshire. So everything that we're going to talk to you about is about the processes for within North Yorkshire. I know that we do have some people from some other areas today, such as Bradford and Humberside, and your local procedures for deaths of children in your local area, if you're not crossing over onto the North Yorkshire boundary, may be slightly different. So it'd be worth linking in with your local CDOP process as well. The agencies who are involved in the CDOP process are quite wide ranging. So obviously we have the local authorities. These are for North Yorkshire Council and also for the City of York. This would also include the safeguarding partnerships for both of the areas and also public health. We also look at health generally. So this is like primary care, secondary care and tertiary care. Midwifery and health visiting services are often involved in these as well. Child and adult mental health services, CAMS are always involved here as well. We also look to engage alcohol and drug services where those are relevant. The police are a key partner in a lot of this work with social care, and also a lot of the children and young people we're talking about will be of school age. And so education does need to be involved, because we have to think about the wider aspects in terms of the impact on children and young people, because it's not just about the child death, but also bereavement support for families and also for the friends of the child as well. And another key player is, of course, the coroner service, who obviously will do their reports and inquests, and we will wait until that information is finished before we will finalise the CDOC process, so that we have all of the information to hand at the time of the review. So we talk about two forms of deaths in the CDOC. The first form of death is an expected child death. So an expected child death by statutory guidance would be a child who was believed to have died, whereas an unexpected death is one where in the previous 24 hours we wouldn't have expected them to die. So the way that the guidance links into an expected child death is it might be the death of a child with a life-limiting condition, or the death of an extremely premature baby, or the death of a child with an oncology condition. When we're talking about an unexpected death, this is where the death of the child or infant which was not anticipated as a significant possibility in the previous 24 hours before the death, or where there was an unexpected collapse or incident leading to or precipitating the events which led to the death. So, for example, a child who was killed due to a road traffic collision, the death of a young person who was who's taken her own life, or maybe the death of a baby who was found unresponsive when otherwise, well, you know, as you've might have heard the term SUDI, or sudden unexpected deaths in infancy. When a child dies, this is where you need to be aware of the procedures. So a notification must be made to the North Yorkshire and York CDOC using either the online notification form, which is available from our website and also from the York website, by email and or by a phone, no later than 48 hours after the death. You can access this form, as I said, from both websites. If the child resides outside of the area, a notification must still be made to North Yorkshire and York, and then what we will do is then inform and liaise with the relevant CDOC for the area in which the child lived. This can be done by any professional who's aware of the child death, but it's usually done by the paediatrician or, in terms of the police, senior investigating officer or lead professional. Following this, the next steps will vary depending upon the circumstances of the death. If the lead professional is unsure whether the death is expected or unexpected, then they can discuss this with the child death review officer and or the designated doctor for child deaths. It's advised that a joint agency response meeting is commenced, as it can be discounted at any point, especially when this is where it's not known if a child has died unexpectedly. The review process of an unexpected death has this additional actions which must be completed to expect a child death. Only unexpected deaths have a joint agency response meeting, or you might hear us refer to that as a JARM as well, or a JAR. However, both an expected and an unexpected death will then follow the same path and have a child death review meeting, and we will explore both of these processes throughout the rest of this training. So I'll now hand over to Sally, who will talk to you about the joint agency response.
Thanks, Hayden. I'm Dr. Sally Smith. I'm designated doctor for child deaths in York and North Yorkshire. And so a joint agency response is something that we will do if a child dies unexpectedly. I'll talk a little bit about the process and about when we would call a JAR. So generally speaking, what happens when a child dies unexpectedly is that they're taken to the emergency department, the closest emergency department. And it's at this stage that the joint agency response is triggered. We would usually do this for any unexpected death, and especially if we think that there could be external causes for the death, so for example a road traffic collision or something like that, or if it's sudden and there's no immediate cause that comes to mind, and that might be, for example, a sudden unexpected death in infancy. The next one is if it occurs in custody or if they're detained under the Mental Health Act. Fortunately, that is rare. Or if there are concerns that the death may not have been natural, or that there has been child abuse involved. And this is the one time that CDOT would get involved with stillbirths, because generally we do not review stillbirths, but we would do if a child had been stillborn but there was no healthcare professional in attendance at the time, and that might be if a child was born unexpectedly at home, for example. So generally speaking, what would happen is that the ambulance and the police would attend the scene of the death. The ambulance service would transfer the child to the emergency department. So often the parents will come, or they'll follow shortly afterwards, depending on the circumstances. And at this stage, the police, who will be involved directly, would consider the risks or concerns, and if necessary, secure the scene of death. And the police will then attend the emergency department as well. At the emergency department, sometimes there's ongoing resuscitation of the child, and if so, that's continued. Other times it's clear that the child is deceased and death is confirmed at that stage, and the hospital staff will then notify the coroner because it's unexpected, CDOP, primary care, which is important because the GP will need to be there for supporting the family, but also to know that the child is deceased and that they shouldn't be offering any appointments. And we also notify social care to see if they have any information on the child or family. Any other relevant organisations may also be notified at this stage if a child's known to other services, for example. The attending clinician, who is generally a consultant but may sometimes be a senior registrar, will confirm the death of the child and obviously inform the parents. And at this stage, we would hope that suitable support for the family would be instituted. We often have a quiet room and a nurse available to sit with the family as the news is broken to them and afterwards. And at this stage, the clinician, the paediatrician, will do an examination of the child after the death. And at this stage, we would usually use, certainly in children under the age of 2, but it can be used in older children if it's felt appropriate, what we call the sudden unexpected death in infancy box, which in our area, York and North Yorkshire, is available in every emergency department. I think the next slide will show a picture of it. Yes, that's right. So it contains all the information that you need regarding the CDOT process, and also all the equipment to take any samples that the pathologist or yourselves might require. As I say, we use it in all children under 2, but you can use it in older children. We also have one of these boxes in the mortuary, so that if a child should go straight to the mortuary, which does sometimes happen. Sometimes it happens if the emergency department is extremely full and the child is clearly deceased with no resuscitation ongoing. Sometimes it happens when a child is not known to be a child, that is to say they're an older teenager and they don't have any ID, so you don't know the age of the child, and they're thought to be an adult when they first present. But there's also one of these in the mortuary, so that you can do the samples and the examination in the mortuary if required. And there is also another box which is kept in the biochemistry department, so it can be transferred once this has been used, and there's always one available. Thanks, by the way, to Hull and Humberside, who gave us this idea and showed us how they use theirs. So then we go on to talking about the circumstances of the death with the family, and an initial history is taken. And this, I mean, sometimes the boundaries are a little bit blurred here, because obviously if a child is brought in and there's resuscitation ongoing, a history is taken as you're resuscitating very often. Sometimes it's a more formal process later, but usually we would like it if the health professional is a consultant or a senior registrar, if not, and an experienced police officer, and ideally both of them doing it together. That's really to save the parents having to answer questions twice. It's also so that we can both be clear about what has been said. Ideally, the paediatrician and the policeman would agree the approach in advance, so who would ask which questions and what we need to know. A history from both parents, if possible, would be taken, and we'd be recording the details of this conversation, including what happened, when it happened, how something happened, or why their parents think this might have happened. writing down things verbatim is very important so that we have clear information for later. At the same time and in the background, any other background checks are completed on the family and any other known significant others. Most of the time, this is not a safeguarding issue, and we don't have concerns about deliberate harm to the child. And in these cases, we would then tidy up the child following resuscitation, clean and dress them as appropriate. If we were concerned about safeguarding issues or child abuse at this stage, we would probably leave everything as it was, because there may be a police investigation and we would need to keep everything as it was found. At this stage, we're also thinking about other children in the family. So, for example, if there are other children, who's looking after them, who's going to be with them when they get that news, and if there are any safeguarding issues, who is safe to look after those children. We would offer family photographs if appropriate, or mementos, for example, a lock of hair or a handprint or a footprint in the case of babies. We would obviously record that for the coroner and the pathologist so that they knew that's what we'd done. So home visits are something that we would routinely do in our area. I know that some areas do not routinely do home visits, but in our area we usually would undertake that. Obviously, this depends on the circumstances. It's generally done in cases of sudden unexpected deaths in infancy and childhood where the child has died at home. We may, of course, do a site visit if they'd died at another home. But we wouldn't generally undertake this if they'd, for example, died in a road traffic collision or something like that. This would be done by the senior paediatrician and the senior investigating police officer. And the reason for this is to consider the circumstances around the child's death and to look at the home environment to see if that gives us any clues as to risk factors, for example. Should happen as soon as possible after the death. There are some practical limitations on that, because obviously there are times when out of hours, particularly paediatricians may be on call. We have a very large geographical area in York and North Yorkshire. So if the child lived a long way from the hospital and the paediatrician was the only paediatrician available to cover the hospital, it may have to be deferred until someone else was available to do cover. And that might happen at weekends or middle of the night, something like that. But generally speaking, it's done as soon as it is feasible following the death. I'm just going to run through some things that might make you concerned about possible safeguarding issues. I'm guessing that many of you will be knowing these already, but these are things that might make you concerned, or at least raise your awareness of a need to look into things more closely. So if the family have delayed in seeking help for the child, if there's inconsistency or variability in the history of findings, if the parents tell you that the child has done something that you know that they're not developmentally capable of, example being a 4-month-old falling down the stairs because they're not mobile. If a child's already known to be at risk of neglect or abuse, or for example, they're subject to a child protection plan, then obviously we'd have to be investigating that carefully as well. Again, other risk factors would be impaired mental health in the parent or the child themselves, if the parents have significant learning difficulties, or if there's evidence of domestic abuse. All of those do not mean that this is a safeguarding issue, but mean that we just need to be alert to be careful to exclude that. Other things that we might look at, inappropriate, aggressive or unexpectedly uncooperative behaviour. Again, that's quite difficult to call, because if a family's just had a tragedy of the sudden death of a child, parents can react in all sorts of different ways, and sometimes this sort of behaviour is more of a result of shock than anything more suspicious, but that is something we just think about. If we do a home visit and find extreme squalor or evidence of disguised compliance, that is to say parents say that they've been doing things which they haven't been, or if there's evidence of substance abuse or excessive alcohol consumption, dangerous sleeping environments, clearly evidence of trauma, or evidence of neglect such as inappropriate or insufficient toys, infant food, bedding, etc. in the house, then those are sort of things that we're looking at in the home visit. In an older child who we fear may have taken their life, then we're looking maybe for writings or diaries, and police may take their computers or phones to look for further evidence there. Debriefing for professionals, it's important to do that. This is not part of CDOP itself, but it's part of the general care of the professionals involved. All participants should be invited, including the ambulance crew, if appropriate. And it's an important opportunity for people to share information, but also thoughts and feelings about the situation. Usually at a later stage, we consider things like learning lessons, could think of things have been done differently. And this debrief is not the joint agency response nor the strategy meeting. So a strategy meeting is held by social care if appropriate, if there are safeguarding concerns. Joint agency responses is arranged by CDOP, and that is for every unexpected death. But this debrief is more of an individual hospital response usually. So thinking specifically about the joint agency response meeting now, it's multi-agency, and in our regulations it states that it can be done up to 72 hours after the notification of death. Now, generally speaking, it's done within 24 to 48 hours, but obviously if a child death happens at the weekend, it would usually occur Monday to Friday. So that's the reason for the time frame. It's coordinated by the Child Death Review Officer. We have a new one, Alison, who's with us today. We're really pleased to see that she's joined us, and she will be ensuring that all the relevant agencies involved are invited to the meeting. Now, sometimes these meetings are fairly small, other times they can be involving quite a few professionals. And the point of this meeting is to discuss and share information that agencies hold about the child, the family, directly relating to the death, and also background history, to ascertain if there are any safeguarding concerns, and also to identify future support to the child's family, also to their peers and any professionals involved. There may be some actions that come from this, and individuals will be tasked with completing this depending on what actions are identified. It looks at the social environment, it looks at parenting capacity, we're looking at the physical environment. At this stage, we identify a key worker. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And we also start thinking about service provision around the child before the death and at the time of death. So any sort of responses that we could improve upon, or anything that could have been done better which may have prevented the death or future deaths. Sometimes in high profile cases we might need to think about communications, so we may need to think about the press interest if there is one. Sometimes these deaths can have a high profile on social media, and we need to think about the response to that, and have a think about how that's managed. Again, depends on the case really. So at this meeting, we also think about whether the circumstances of the child's death meet the criteria for notification to the Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel or any other review group if we are concerned about safeguarding or specific actions that might be required by agencies. Sometimes we have the meeting, which is very soon after the death, and then after a few days we find out more information that may be relevant, and in these cases when new information comes to light, we might arrange a second meeting. Back in the old days, the joint agency response meeting was called the phase 1 meeting. We would sometimes hold a phase 2 meeting, which would be the second meeting. It's often about a week after the first one, but this isn't routine, and this is just if there is more information that we need to discuss. Any professional can request a second meeting if they have further relevant information or specific concerns. Recently we've started to look in more detail into the role of the key worker in this situation, and the key worker can be any professional, but the aim or the role of the key worker is to be a reliable and accessible point of contact for the family after the death. So it's usually a professional that's already known to the family. They can help coordinate meetings between families and professionals as required. For example, it may be appropriate for the paediatrician to meet with the family after the death if they have information about the cause of death or a post-mortem result, for example. They also can provide information to the family on the child death review process and what's happening with any investigations that are as a result of this. The key worker is able to liaise as required with the coroner's officer, who will also potentially be investigating the case from the coroner's point of view. And quite importantly, they represent the voice of parents at professionals meetings, because the CDOT meetings are not directly including parents, but we do welcome feedback from parents. So the parents should be made aware of the meetings, ideally through the key worker, and they should feel that they are able to make their representation, their views to the meeting as well. So the key worker can feed back parents' opinions, views and feelings. And also the key worker can then provide feedback to the family after the meeting to say what the next steps are. Also, of course, importantly, they'll be looking to signpost to bereavement support for the family as well. Sometimes people ask about information sharing and interagency communication. This does fall under the safeguarding umbrella, although most cases are not directly safeguarding related, and therefore you can assume that you can safely share information with other agencies, and you should assume this. We know from experience that many of the serious case reviews that have been completed have identified poor communication between agencies as a major factor. So information sharing is encouraged. There may be times when it can't be shared, and the police, for example, might let us know that they're doing a criminal investigation and prosecution and therefore are unable to share certain information, but they should tell us that that is the case if so. We always record our decisions on information sharing, and if we decide that we will not share or cannot share information for a specific reason, then the agency should be made aware of that. The only time that sharing information is difficult is when there is third-party involvement and sensitive information to be shared, in which case things do become a little bit more difficult, and discretion is needed, and discussions should be held about what can and can't be shared. So after the joint agency response meeting, the child death review officer will require extra information in order to proceed with the CDOT process, and they will request extra information from all the agencies that have been involved in the care of the child, either before the death or at the time of the death. There's a standard reporting form, which we used to call Form B. I'm not sure if we still do, but that will request information from agencies. What I would say is that if you are the person who receives a Form B or extra information form, please fill in everything that you know, but do not worry too much if you don't know the answers to some of the questions. It's a standard form, so it's likely that you'll know some things but not others. If you look at the form and think, I don't really have much information, or I don't know anything about this, but I can tell you about that, just fill in what you know. Don't spend hours and hours thinking about how you're going to get this information, and then send it back to us, because we receive these from different agencies and they're all a part of the jigsaw. We put it all together and gather the information that way. We'd rather have a form back which is incomplete than not a form back because you're worried about how to complete it. If you really don't have any information, feel free to send the form back saying I have no information, then we won't keep pestering you for it. The child death review officer will also obtain copies of any other investigations, for example, a serious incident investigation report or other such stuff. That often happens when a child, for example, dies in hospital. All of the information contributes to the review of the child's death. So anything that you have that you think may be relevant, please do send it to us. So the coroner, again, apologies to those of you who are not in our area, but our coroner in York and North Yorkshire is Mr. John Heath. He has the senior coroner's officer, Rachel Davis, who's always happy to have a chat about things if you've got concerns, and a team of coroner's officers as well. The coroner will investigate deaths that are reported to them if it appears that the death was violent or unnatural. Again, not usual, but does happen. The cause of death is unknown. That tends to be more common. Or again, very much less common in children at least, the person died in prison, custody, or any other type of state detention. The coroner has a duty to ascertain for bereaved people, in this case parents usually, and for official records, who has died, how they died, when they died, and where they died. Usually 3 of those 4 are easily answered. The how they died is sometimes a bit more complex, but that is the coroner's job. If the cause of death is not available even following a post-mortem examination, which the coroner may organise, then they will hold an inquest. And at that stage, the coroner will come to a conclusion at the end of the inquest and provide documentation for the family so that they can register the death. Supporting the family. Hayden, do you want to take over at this point, or would you like me to carry on?
No, I'm happy to take over. Okay, so in terms of keeping the family informed, what we do is ensure that all relevant information is passed to the family and primary health care. So we have the police family liaison officer or the family first contact officer may take an important role in this process if they're assigned to the case. And following on from the joint agency response meeting, professionals should allocate a key worker to provide that support and information for all members of the family. And the profession of the key worker may vary depending upon the circumstances and who it's felt would be the best fit for that particular instance and family. We have on our website the Child and Family Bereavement Support page, and the aim is to basically assist children, young people, parents, carers and any other family members in accessing bereavement information, resources and services. We also include national, regional and local bereavement support services for professionals and families as well, because obviously we are aware that the death of a child or a young person can have an impact on professionals as well as people who were related and knew them or were friends. And we also include a list of the children's literature to support with the death and bereavement as well. So all of this links into what we'll talk about would be identified from maybe a JARM, which would be that maybe if it's a child in school that they might need support, and a lot of these resources would be available from this page. Martin House Hospice offered a bereavement support service to families whose child has died, and experienced and specialist bereavement support workers and counsellors are also available. The service is available to those who have or have not used the services of the hospice. So just because if a child hasn't been in the hospice doesn't mean that you're not going to get that support. And little rooms for families to use following the death of a child are available as well. And bereavement training for different services is also available from Martin House. So in terms of the child death review meeting, if the child's death was unexpected, the child death review or CDR meeting will be arranged by the child death reviewing officer, which would be Alison for us and for City of York. Those who are attending the JARM meeting and any other additional professionals involved with the family following a child's death will be invited to the child death review. And the meeting is arranged once the post-mortem is undertaken, if it's undertaken, and it's available for the discussion. If the child was unexpected, then the CDR can be held in a variety of different forums. For example, it could be through clinical governance, in SUIs or mortality and morbidity meetings as well. The purpose of all CDR meetings is to discuss and review the background history, treatment and outcomes of any investigations that have taken place to determine as far as possible what the likely cause of death is, and to ascertain any contributory or modifiable factors across all domains specific to the child. So, is it something that's impacted? A modifiable factor could be a variety of things. So a child dying in a car accident could be as simple a modifiable factor as they may have survived if they had had a seatbelt on, or if a parent didn't follow the safer sleeping guidance in terms of restricting airflow to a baby in a cot and various different other things. To identify if there are any lessons to be learned and identify any recommendations and actions in terms of any service provision that was provided to the family would be one of the other intended outcomes of the child death review meeting. And the child death review analysis form should be completed within the meeting as well. And that analysis form will be reviewed, and it will also be discussed in the child death overview panel meeting as well, which will look at the case at the very end to agree any modifiable factors and any actions that need to be taken forward. So when we get to the child death overview panel, the CDOP, as it's otherwise known, consists of any partners from public health. We have the designated doctor for child death, which obviously Sally, the designated doctor for safeguarding. We have North Yorkshire Police would be our local force that would attend the meetings because they go across North Yorkshire and the City of York. Social care, whether or not that be social care from City of York or from North Yorkshire. Any health visiting services or midwifery services that were available, other local authority representation as be appropriate, and education partners as well. And we would also look to co-opt any other members as would be required for that particular CDOP panel. The CDOP meets between 6 and 8 times per year, and what happens is obviously a lot of these cases may be known to professionals who've been involved in the case, but we anonymise any cases that are reviewed by the CDOP process, and consideration is given to the cause of death, whether or not there were any things that could be changed, some modifiable factors to the death which could have prevented that child from dying or other children in the future in similar circumstances, and any issues and lessons that can be learnt from that. And then what we do is we'll take that into looking and reviewing practice. There may be some actions for agencies involved with the purpose of basically improving the care and reducing further deaths, and that is something that we have done, and we'll come on to talk about that in due course. So DCSF classification of causes of child deaths are deliberately inflicted injury, abuse or neglect, suicide or deliberate self-inflicted harm. We can also have trauma or other external factors, malignancy, acute medical or surgical conditions, if a child had a chronic medical condition, or maybe there was some sort of chromosomal, genetic and or congenital anomalies. If there was a perinatal or neonatal event, it could be an infection, or it could also be classified as a sudden unexpected death in infancy.
Shall I just clarify on the classification there, Hayden?
Yes,
so sometimes children die and they have more than one of these issues. So, for example, they could have both a malignancy and an infection. We would always score it principally as the, how can I put it, highest up the list or the lowest number. So if they had, for example, a malignancy and an infection, we would score it as malignancy. If they had a congenital anomaly and an infection, that would go down as a congenital anomaly, because that was the main cause. It's higher up the list. Just to clarify that's how we would do it if there are more than one cause of death.
So in terms of the local picture, in 2022 to 23, 22 children resided within North Yorkshire died, and 68% of these children were under 27 days old. So it's a significant proportion normally is the under 28 days, which is one of the highest areas for child death. And this is in keeping with the previous year and in line with the regional and national data. 17 were male, 6 were female, 22 were white British or white other. 25 deaths were reviewed by the CDOP within the same period. One thing that you've got to remember is that while a child dies within a year period, which runs from April to March, so we run on the financial year, just because a child dies in that year doesn't mean that the CDOP will occur. CDOPs can take a long time to come through, especially if there's a criminal investigation for that meeting. So you will find that we will be reviewing cases maybe from 1, 2 or 3 years ago. Of these cases, that occurred in the previous years, they can, like I said, can take over 6 months. And of the 22 cases that occurred in 2022 and 23, 2 have been discussed at panel, with the remainder to be scheduled following further information gathering and any further investigations or prosecutions in each case. But there will always be this disparity in the deaths reviewed and the deaths that have taken place and notified to CDOP, and the deaths reviewed by the CDOP are always within the reporting period. So in terms of our data analysis, we have perinatal and neonatal events account for 28.7% of cases. We had chromosomal, genetic and or congenital anomalies, which was 16.3%, and then malignancy was the next highest level at 15.7% of cases. In terms of modifiable factors, as we mentioned before, these are defined as those where, if the actions could be taken through national or local interventions, the risk of future deaths could be reduced. And out of the 22 child death reviews in the 2022-23 period, the child death review panel identified 12 cases, or 54% of the cases reviewed that year had modifiable factors that were identified within those cases. In terms of learning from child deaths, the findings from all child deaths informs local and strategic planning, which would include any joint strategic needs assessment that we might have, or how best to safeguard and promote the welfare of children and young people across North Yorkshire and the City of York. Learning influences also the CDOP priorities for every year as well. So the CDOP does have certain things that it identifies that it wants to take forward in order to try and reduce any further deaths. So this is where we come on to talk about what we've achieved as a result of all of the work from the CDOP. And we'll first look at SUDI prevention. So one of the things that was identified by the CDOP a year or two ago was an increase in the number of children who had died in sudden unexpected deaths in infancy. And the Day or Night Sleep Right campaign was introduced by the CDOP. So SUDI prevention has been one of the CDOP priorities for the past 2 years. And this was due to a sharp increase in the number of babies who died as a result of sleeping. And a task and finish group was established to develop a prevent and protect model, and with expert guidance from the North Yorkshire County Council, as was then comms team. The group agreed the strap line, Day or Night Sleep Right, which is the founding slogan for the campaign. What happened then was the group also developed a multi-agency practice guidance, which provides clear research-based information on factors which can increase the risk of a sudden unexpected death in infancy, and provide practical tips on how practitioners can work together with all families to adopt the safe sleep practice. Alison, if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat the link to the practice guidance, that would be fantastic. Thank you. But the graphic that you can see on this screen is the graphic that we use to promote the Day or Night Sleep Right campaign, with the aim of reducing that number of children who have died as a result of SUDI. The group acknowledged that there was training needed to support practitioners to both feel competent and confident when working with families where safe sleep practice may be a concern. And the materials developed, which included PowerPoint presentations, a YouTube film, we did a podcast on this as well, and we agreed a training plan both for single and multi-agency training for group members to take forward within their own organisations. The partnership promoted the Day or Nights and Sleep Right campaign on social media platforms during the Lullaby Trust's National Safe Sleep Week, and we also will continue with multi-agency partners to ensure regular messaging are embedded in businesses as usual to ensure continued focus on safer sleep, because what you find is these things can be a bit like the fourth bridge, and if you have to keep promoting and raising awareness of this, because we have turnover in staff across multiple agencies, and we always want to keep it on a higher priority. But the graphics that you can see there are some of the ones that you might see through our social media. We'll provide links at the end of the presentation to those links as well. So what can you do? Well, first off, to support this as a campaign, you can visit the safeguardingchildren.co.uk/sleep right page, or the Safer York page, which is saferchildrenyork.org.uk/babies and pregnancy, to access this. And from that page, you'll be able to see training links. There are a number of resources and practice guidance, and there's also downloadable background and email banners, which you can also include just to keep that knowledge and raise awareness within your organisations. There is also on the NYSCP YouTube channel a YouTube video which gives a presentation in terms of the Day or Night Sleep Right campaign. In terms of suicide prevention, work has been undertaken to explore what available training is offered by partners across North Yorkshire and York, and you can find this on the Headfirst website. There's also a regional Talk Suicide campaign that has been promoted across partnerships as well, and also training in education within North Yorkshire is being delivered to upskill staffers' knowledge about suicide prevention and self-harming behaviours, and this has included the 5 assessing suicide in kids courses for teachers, or otherwise known as ASK, and you can find links to that training on the NYSCP training page as well. We also have a self-harm and suicidal ideation pathway. This has been in place for a couple of years, but is still relevant, and we will be reviewing this alongside the City of York, because they have a slightly different pathway, because we're looking to develop a single pathway across both areas to complement the fact that we are also one single CDOC as well. We also reviewed the sample school child protection policy, which is available to all schools, as well as the school safeguarding, school child protection manual as well. And within there are sample policies for schools to adopt in relation to self-harm and suicidal ideation. North Yorkshire and York have also wrote to all educational settings outlining the areas of action for their own organisations, and to signpost to these resources. There is a dedicated section in the self-harm and suicidal ideation pathway, which is only assigned to additional information for schools, but for everybody else there's also, and also for schools, there's a general shared area. And one of the designated nurses has led a review with the local authorities and health trusts regarding discharge planning. We have hosted a theme managers masterclass or suicide prevention with guest presenter Pat Sower from Starfish, which you can watch that masterclass online at the link as you can see on the screen. Pat Sower has a very emotional story, because she's talking from personal experience from child death here as well, and is a very good speaker in relation to understanding some of these issues. In terms of CDOT priorities, the priorities for the CDOT for 2022-3 was looking at the role of the key worker, regional What 3 Words apps campaign, and neonatal and twin deaths audit. All of that work has now been completed or is not progressing any further, particularly the What 3 Words app, because that does have a commercial aspect. It was felt that it was something that we couldn't really progress due to that nature. However, the CDOT priorities for 2023-4, here we are looking at building on the success of the Day or Night Sleep Right campaign, and the CDOT will be launching a further campaign of Who's Sober, which will help to promote the need to have children safe and sober adults in a home when caring for babies and young children. The campaign will also link to the Day or Night Sleep Right campaign, and the CDOT work will closely work with colleagues in public health regarding alcohol and substance misuse. And in fact, this week on the NYSCP website, we have just launched our substance and alcohol use with parents and carers practice guidance, which has been developed by a number of different practitioners from and it's also been adopted by the North Yorkshire Safeguarding Adults Board as well. So that will be available on the website. And again, Alison, if you wouldn't mind just putting a link into that in the chat, that would be really helpful. The CDOT will also be working closely with Roadwise to promote safer use of roads for pedestrians, drivers and cyclists, and this work will consider learning from modifiable factors in child deaths which have occurred, and will also link in with colleagues from North Yorkshire Council Highways and others to ensure that the full partnership approach to this work is in place. In a matter of fact, we do have towards the end of the year in November, we are looking to run a lunchtime masterclass which will look at the roadwise and drink drive sort of areas to raise awareness with the professionals on the run up to Christmas. In terms of the regional work which we do as a CDOP, the North Yorkshire and York CDOP have joined with Hull, East Riding, North East and North Lincolnshire to form the regional CDOP group. Together, the group, from the required footprint of 60 plus, as stated in the Child Death Review operational and statutory guidance, and the group work together to share learning, good practice and emerging themes across the region footing. Because one of the things that we can see in terms of the number of deaths that we have is normally very small. However, any change in the number of deaths can give an indication of a false spike, but it can also be an indicator when we look at a wider footprint in terms of the number of deaths that have occurred, that there might actually be some themes, and we've just not had a particular child death in relation to that at that particular time. So there are a number of different issues which have been identified through this, and the group came together for the first learning event theme, which looked at SUDI, and that took place in December of last year. As a group, it meets quarterly and consists of 14 CDOP coordinators and officers from each of the local authorities in Yorkshire and Humber.
This is a slightly different group, actually, Hayden. This is a specific group which Alison will become involved with once she's settled into our process. The previous group was more of a general CDOP meeting just to combine our areas to increase our footprint and look at themes throughout our region rather than just in our own local CDOP.
Yeah, apologies. Thank you for that clarification, Sally. So this group meets quarterly and consists of 14 CDOP coordinators and officers from each of the local authorities in Yorkshire and Humber, and the meetings are a forum basically which all of the coordinators in each of the areas can discuss and share knowledge and any best practice, and also share details about any arising issues or concerns that they may have. The group is a form of peer-to-peer support for the CDOP coordinators and officers, and the mortality officer also sits on this group as well. We also have access to the National Child Mortality Database, and this has been in place since 2019, and its partners include the University of Bristol, SANS, Child Bereavement UK and the Lullaby Trust. And what this database does is it collects data regarding all child deaths across England to facilitate learning to reduce prevention, child mortality, and drives improvement in the quality of health and social care for children and young people in England to help reduce potentially avoidable deaths. So all of the information that is input and collected in relation to each child death is uploaded to the National Child Mortality Database through an online portal to help really develop and inform this emerging national picture. The contribution, there have been a few thematic reports that have been produced as a result of this. The first of them is the contribution of newborn health to child mortality across England. And what this one did was it looked to draw on the investigations of how illnesses around the time of births affects the health of children and young people up to the age of 10 to really identify any learning and make some recommendations for service providers and policymakers. The work in terms of the thematic report for suicide in children and young people draws on data to identify the common characteristics of children and young people who die by suicide, investigate factors associated with all of these types of deaths, and then to make any recommendations for service providers and policymakers again. And then the child mortality and social deprivation thematic report looked at data which investigated what were the characteristics of the deaths of children and young people to identify if there are any socio-economic or deprivation is associated with childhood mortality as well. Other things that the National Child Mortality Database does is it provides a range of advice and guidance to professionals and to parents as well. They do have a website and you can look this up. The learning platform that they have is also available, and there are safety notices available to download as well. They also have webinars which they will run occasionally, as well as blogs which also look at some of the issues from the National Child Mortality Database as well. Other types of reviews which the CDOP might contribute to, there is the Leader, which is funded by NHS England and is commissioned by the Health Quality and Improvement Partnership. And the aim of this is to assist improvements in the quality of health or social care services delivered for children with disabilities, and also to help reduce the premature mortality of people with any learning disabilities. All deaths for children with a learning disability over the age of 4 years of age are notified to the leader by the Child Death Overview Panel, and they will then work alongside leader in the event of a case review relating to that death. Before I move on to any other upcoming masterclasses, does anybody have any questions about the CDOT? Please, either you can talk, or if you want to put something in the chat. Alison, do we have any questions in the chat? I can't see any, but
no, I think they've all been answered at the minute.
okay. Well, in case of if you do have any questions, then please feel free to contact any members of the NYSCP business unit. So just visit safeguardingchildren.co.uk as well if you want to be able to access the procedures. The procedures can be accessed through our website, and when you look at professionals, there is a drop down and CDOP is under there, but there's also policies, procedures and 1 minute guide, procedures, practice guidance, 1 minute guides, which you can then select, and then there will be the CDOT procedures that will be under that. In terms of any upcoming masterclasses that we have, so our masterclasses are 1 hour sessions that are normally on the first Wednesday of every month, unless there's a reason why we wish to delay it. So we've got upcoming masterclasses. One is actually missing from here. There is actually on the 6th of September, there is the Social, Emotional, Mental Health Masterclass. On the 20th of September, we have Making a Good Referral. We then have on the 4th of October, Reducing Parental Conflict. And on the evening, there is an Early Years Masterclass for childminders and early years providers only. This would include schools that have an early years provision. On the 8th of November, we have the Drink Drive Masterclass, which is the one that links to one of the CDOT priorities for this year. In December, we'll be running the Modern Slavery Masterclass, and then in January, we have the Multi-Agency Child Exploitation Masterclass. And then in February, we'll be looking at learning from the LADOs, the Local Authority Designated Officer cases. So these are cases where there's been an allegation against a member of staff or a volunteer working with children and young people, and the learning that the LADOs identified from there. So for more information about all of that training, that is available from our training page. Again, the link is there, but to get to the training page, you can also just go on to safeguardingchildren.co.uk, move your mouse over to professionals and select training from a drop-down menu that appears. Most of our training, or almost all of our training, is uploaded to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@NYSCP. We will also be uploading this training as well, so you'll be able to review this training later, or maybe, for example, I know we've got representation from schools. If this is something you want to share with schools or within your organisation, you can happily share this video as well. Also, on completion of the masterclass or this training, you will be sent an email which will ask for feedback. Can you please complete that? Then you will get a certificate of attendance for attending this course to go towards your continual professional development. The key links for our website and everyone is here. So we've got safeguardingchildren.co.uk. There is twitter.com/NYSCP1 for one of our social media. You can also go to Facebook, which is facebook.com/NYSCP1. There is our YouTube, youtube.com/NYSCP, and there is specific playlists full of lots of different videos for specifically designed for people who work with children and young people. We also have a podcast as well, which is spotify.com/pod/show/North Yorkshire Safeguarding Children Partnership, because that really rolls off the tongue. So you can go to Spotify, do a search for the partnership, and you will be able to download the link from there. The other thing that we have is the e-bulletin. The e-bulletin is available from that link. You can also go to safeguardingchildren.co.uk and then move your mouse over professionals, and there is an option of e-bulletin in the sub-menu that will appear, and that will actually provide you with the details of all of our previous e-bulletins and the same link to also be able to subscribe to bulletins in the future as well. Other than that, unless there are any further questions, I would just like to say thank you for your attendance today. We know it's a very emotive sort of subject, and we do hope that you don't come across this, but this is key information for you to know, just in case that you ever do come into contact with a child who dies. But thank you very much for attending, and please also spread the word about this training as well. Thank you.